So, paradigm shifts. Let's get into what, because it's not just the tools, it's also the systems around the tools. So how does a paradigm shift work? Well, the first thing you got to understand about technology, and this is actually anybody who's an investor in technology, just thinking about technology, this is the classic way to understand this, and it's actually a really good way to think. Now, any new technology that gets adopted into a society or into a market goes through basically these stages. You start off with the innovators who jump on the new thing and really want to play with it and push it and play with it and figure it out. That's always a very small part, but it's also a very innovative crew, and it's also the crew that starts to make it popular. Then you get the early adopters who say, oh, that's really, they're maybe not creating it, but they're basically seeing it very early and jumping on it. Then you hit a point where you get the early majority, essentially, which is like, oh, I get it now, boom, I'm going to be at least the first on my block to do it. Ultimately say, I get it. The late majority says, I'm on board. I'll get my cell phone eventually. And then you get the laggards, the people that kicking and screaming, are going to hang on to a black and white TV until you can't even buy a black and white TV, right? This happens with all technologies, essentially. The skill is understanding where you are in this curve and which ones are really going to take off permanently. And that's where you get guys, that's where people make their money, and that's where people get aligned in their business plans. Anyhow, the second thing is it's not just the adoption of the technology. The second thing is the systems of how you work with that technology. How does it affect business? How do you do things with it? And that works in this paradigm shift thing, which I alluded to at the beginning of the talk, which is essentially there's an old way of doing things, a system or routines. It's like everyone knows how this works. OK, I get how that does. And then what happens is somebody has a new idea and says, there's a totally different way you could do this with a new technology usually. And it's usually rooted in new technology, but not always. It could be a new approach to something. And that's interesting, but there's a lot of people with new ideas. It takes essentially the next stage is somebody that adopts it early and proves or maybe it's not just one person, but several people prove that this is a better way to go. And as soon as that happens, and you say that is clearly superior to this old way, what happens in almost a flash of a blink of a historical blink of an eye, everyone shifts. And in fact, the old thing doesn't totally go away, but essentially all the energy goes to the new thing. This happens over and over and over again in technology. And in fact, the biggest thing, and another big way to understand the paradigm shift that's going on the biggest level, is essentially we've been watching top-down systems, centralized systems, mainframe systems, broadcast television systems, all these systems that were essentially hierarchical are essentially in this struggle with all the kind of bottom-up, decentralized, kind of out-of-control systems. And ultimately, we're watching this huge meta paradigm shift happening. That's another way to think of it. But the way I'm going to show you, and so here's an example. The one that's actually been on our minds is you had this old way of doing old media, whether it was newspapers or books or magazines or radio, TV, music, worked perfectly fine in the 21st century, all essentially broadcast. Some professionals at the top choosing, and everybody just listened and watched and kind of read at the bottom, right? Well, what happened with that internet is it knocked everyone on its butt. And essentially, boom, you've got this paradigm shift. And what I'm going to basically do is I'm going to tell you 3 of them here in the stories of 3 companies that's essentially about the future, where it's going in the mobile, where it's going in the video, and where it's going in social. And we're in the middle of these ones, so you can see the power of what's happening, but it's not fully played out. So you can kind of still see why we're in the midst of it.